And we open the table for more participations of the, please, go ahead, Claire.
Claire Narad, University of Maryland. I enjoyed what you were talking about, Dali Young. One thing you didn't mention, on which I've seen working with risk assessors from the Chinese Center for Risk Assessment, is that one thing that your government has done, not only encouraging increase in capacity building, but actually monitoring foodborne illness, monitoring prevalence levels in the marketplace and such. And I would like you to expand more on that, because I think that's one of the things. It wasn't just capacity; it was actually monitoring what was happening in the country. Could you expand more on that?
Absolutely, and this is where I should mention I'm an American citizen, so I can't claim the Chinese government to be my government. My government is here. But let me speak to the issue. I think actually over time. And this actually has happened across the spectrum of from infectious diseases to food safety to drug safety, and there are national databases that have been developed, and China has done a great job in this regard in making sure that this data, actually this infrastructure has been developed over time, and already also part of the reason for China is that the market is huge. And so has communications and transportation networks. As a result, everything moves fast. And that means if you have a problem, it also moves very fast. So as a result, actually, this effort to have enhanced information has become extremely valuable. Part of in the past, originally, regulators leaning on big for example, chains, for example, Walmart, they became very useful because it's much easier to monitor Walmart than to say the tens, hundreds of thousands of mom and pop stores. But today, however, increasingly with cheaper information infrastructure, so it's much easier to do so. And a lot of the effort is devoted to that, actually. And also in the case in monitoring adverse drug reactions as well, and that has become much better. Partly also because of the problems. The problem was big because many drugs, especially, for example, the Chinese traditional medicine injectables, they didn't undergo rigorous testing in the beginning. So there are legacy issues, and as a result, the monitoring actually was enhanced to take account of that and also to react to that so that actually they don't balloon. Instead, over time, the national regulator has gradually work to cope and to deal with these legacy issues, in fact. So I think a lot of this, and especially now with the development of handheld devices, the QR codes, and also blockchain and so on, I do think actually China is actually increasingly going to be playing a major role in developing this kind of systems, especially because China has some of the best tech companies online in integrating those kind of systems together.
Josh?
Thank you. This is really a question for anybody, but maybe particularly for Dr. Yang. The crises happen in every country, even the United States. But there's a big difference between the crises that lead to positive changes and the crises that lead to the person being executed, right? And the United States doesn't have an FDA because we had a rational discussion about the need for an FDA. We had a major crisis in 1937 around sulfanilamide. We had major crisis in 1961 around thalidomide. This led to major legislation. The agency was viewed as a hero. You know, in both cases, it was strengthened, and all of that was very strategic in a way by the agency leadership. Almost every major advance for FDA has been in the wake of a crisis. And this is a question maybe also for Dr. Porras, but, you know, is there any, if part of what we're thinking about is how to strengthen local capacity, crisis gives an opportunity for people to realize how important it is. And I just wonder if there's any, well, you certainly feel free to dispute the premise, but like, if you agree, is there any formal training or programs that can help the people rise to the challenge in the moment, you know, rather than just sort of suffer in the middle of a crisis, but actually rise to be an effective leader and use that as a point of leverage, like happened in the United States, for a much stronger agency in the end.
I want to compliment especially what you just said. Also, of course, it's not just the 1930s and 1960s. I come from Chicago, and Chicago was the site also for Upton Sinclair's novel on the jungle and so on. So in many ways, the stockyards of Chicago played a massive role in the development of the U.S. system in this case. But of course, those are emerging systems. Usually they have to unleash the forces. But over time, however, I always emphasize also in the development of systems, we also sometimes see a ratchet effect. And also diffusion of innovations. So I think actually one of the great things I also was very heartened to hear from Mike Ward is how increasingly internationally there are processes now where nations learn from each other, and there are processes for transmitting a lot of that information, the best practices, actually. So I think actually increasingly, of course, you don't want to waste a crisis, as people have been emphasizing, and China certainly took advantage certainly responded to the crisis, and also so did other countries as well in that. But over time, however, the demand side has become more important, I think, especially as systems become a little more mature, maybe not at the level 4 level, but increasingly countries aspire. But part of it is also the business demand, I think, actually is very important, because pharma companies and others, if they want to advance, they need to satisfy certain requirements. Food companies too, if they want to export, they need to do certain things. And industry associations have a desire also to elevate their standards, or certainly to serve as guardians in certain cases. So my sense is actually increasingly, I think what's interesting is to what extent I think sort of there could be greater efforts in spreading that information. I could imagine, for example, the centers of excellence and so on could be a very valuable way, especially because, I mean, the regulatory state itself is a relatively new phenomenon from a global perspective. The diffusion, the massive diffusion of the global regulatory state from the 1970s has allowed for the burgeoning emergence of a lot of people who study the regulatory state across the continents. So I do see the possibility for those professionals, for practitioners, for governments to be involved in developing certain centers for spreading information, for further exchanging experiences, but in fact with the kind of system that are being developed to spread a lot of this information, certainly.
Analia wants to complement.
I think that's a great question, although I'm not sure I have the answer, because I've seen it both ways. I've seen cases where crisis, for example, in Argentina a few years ago, there was a really awful case of falsifies oncological medicine. It was all criminal, and it was an amazing opportunity for the agency to actually install one of the most advanced systems of traceability. So again, another positive reaction. I guess part of it was that the agency wasn't involved. It was a criminal act, and then so it wasn't involved in the, it wasn't accomplice to any of these. But I also seen it the other way, like the case of milk, that the loss of trust is almost unsurmountable. What's the difference from one or the other? It's a great question. I think you get me thinking, so thank you.
I just say that this is the course I teach at the School of Public Health, how to respond to crises.
Yeah, okay.
And it is because there's so much political energy, to go back to the point, around crises, doing it well can lead to fantastic results. Doing it poorly, I used to say you're fired, but now I know there's worse. Yeah. So but it's very important, and that set of skills to give to regulators may be helpful as well.
Yeah, but I think it's also context. If you're your baby and it's milk, it's a it's a hard one, and it's also culture. I think certain, I don't know all the
Right,
elements.
but in the United States, it was babies and kids that were dying that led to the FDA. It's whether you're perceived as saving babies or killing babies.
Yeah, exactly.
And that has a lot to do with management, I think.
Kenneth and Lemby.
Yeah, just quickly, Josh. In the industry or business, during disaster and crisis, before that, they have what is known as BCP, business continuity planning, so that things would go on. And I thought that that's something I think we should be investing as well for the regulatory agency. And government normally don't, because it's really relegated to the enterprise and business. But then I think there's something we can learn from that, I think.
Just two issues. One is that, of course, I understand what you mean, but I think we have to realize also that nowadays regulators have put a lot of emphasis on crisis prevention. And actually, if you look on certain new product groups, how they have been developed, and some of the new and advanced therapies which have been authorized recently, or you could take even the biosimilars when they started to come, and then there was a lot of, what happens, can we trust? Actually, you could say that probably a lot has not happened due to the prevention built into the regulations in time. And we sometimes don't realize that the shift has been from, probably it's not complete, but there has been a shift from crisis-driven regulation, you could say, to the prevention-driven regulation, which would be the normal way of development. But again, how to handle the crisis, there is an old story, I think it was in food industry in Europe a long time ago, where there were two companies who had problems, really, newspapers and quality issues and things like that. And one company decided to have the denial. They had the denial, they said, no, everything was fine, they threatened with the court, they went to the court, and they fight it back, until to the end. And there was another company in food industry who had something the same, again, explosion in the media and things. And they did completely different approach. They said, we analyzed the case, we are in fault. We will dismantle our management system, we will put a new management system, we will organize a new production line. And they did it everything completely in a transparent way. And although their sin was actually bigger than the first ones, the first one disappeared because the public trust was not there. The one who had even, in principle, a bigger mistake, but due to the complete transparency, complete openness, actually they came out from that stronger and with a better confidence from the public, and this company is still alive. So that's how it goes. And actually in pharma industry it has been the same. Some companies have decided to fight back, and others have been, trying to come forward. And I think some of the generic industries in the recent past was actually choosing this fighting back, and they are not doing very well today.
Catherine.
Thank you. One of the tasks for this committee is to identify how technology and innovation is affecting the work of regulatory agencies. And so my question to you is, over the course of our discussion so far, there have been some examples of technological changes over the last half decade that are affecting all of our regulatory agencies, and certainly the social media was one of them. But introduction of blockchain is another that you mentioned, Ali. QR codes. There are a lot of advances in laboratory instrumentation that are available. So I'd like to include you, Analia, as well from your Central and South American perspective. But what are some of those technologies that you see that are affecting regulatory agencies? And could you opine a little bit about how they are affecting regulatory agencies in middle-income and low-income countries. And are there perhaps some thoughts that could inform our thinking about recommendations to how to deal with these emerging technologies?
Thank you. I think for what we are seeing is it's a general statement that the gaps have shortened a little bit with information technology for the southern regulators, I think, because the ability to remember, most of our countries are dependent on importation. They might have a strong manufacturing base, but a lot comes from other place, and it's actually manufactured and used in another place. So the ability to check and to see what's where just makes a huge difference, which wasn't there before. So as a general thing that. The other one, going back to Lembit's point, the ability to have work sharing platform is changing rapidly. We are providing, for example, one such platform from the MD subgroup, the Medical Device Single Audit Program, which is Canada's, US, Australia, Brazil, and Japan working together for having one single audit program for medical devices around the world, going to one platform and sharing the information in a secure environment. That kind of ability to work, in countries that have 12-hour difference and access the information wasn't there before. And I think it's benefit both sides, the manufacturers and the regulator. And the other issue that I think it's going to become more and more and more important for at least our countries is one is the ability to trace medicines, again, because they're coming from a different place. And although a lot of these products have easier entry because they come from FDA and they come from, you really have a hard time checking if that's the same product. So having a way to make sure that the same bottle, it's not because it's a falsified, but it might come from a different manufacturing site with different GMP standards, even if it's labeled by the same manufacturer. So, the traceability of that product from origin to place and making sure that's the same, that's a huge difference for us. And the other one, the traceability within the market, and to prevent falsifies and substandard products going into that, which is still something that I think is worrisome for every single country, rich and poor, but for places with a lot of permeability, especially islands, places where you don't have good control of the market, I think it's going to make the life of regulators much easier. So I think that's...
Please,
Well, there have been some really quite basic changes, because if we look not so long time history back, regulators worked on the dossiers which were paper dossiers, yeah? Even now, a lot of the middle-income countries and lower-income countries, they still work on the paper dossiers. Now, there has been a shift, of course, from the more advanced regulators using the common format, but not only common format, CTD, Common Technical Document format prescribed, but also IT solutions to have the better capability of accessing the dossiers and handling them, which also, if used consistently across the regulators, can create some sort of a better avenues to collaborate. So some of the technical standards can also facilitate collaboration and mutual understanding and working together. And this is something that this type of platforms for the collaboration, I think, based on the new technologies, I think it would be extremely valuable to develop them further and to try to see how we could use that all the new IT technology advancements that are coming available. So there is a lot of trying to put the technical capabilities we have developed in the society to the use of regulators, and there are still some avenues to improve. We are not there yet that we could say the drug regulation or food regulation is on the upfront of using the new technologies so thank you for this question.
Just to make sure, one thing we're encouraging, especially stronger regulations, to put as much information in the public domain as possible. Because that's what's benefiting regulators that are trying to improve. And I think that's something. And the other thing that's not only for regulators, for industry. We need to start pressuring industry to be more transparent with their data and put it there. That helps a lot for countries to fast track, to harmonize. So I think it goes both ways, but I would encourage the committee to think along those lines. How do you make these regulators in Northern Hemisphere and the industry to put as much possible as in the public domain to the benefits of everyone? So.
May I cite a few examples from the Philippines, for instance, how IT has improved the FDA work. Documents were getting lost, so we instituted a document tracking system. So now things are more efficient. At the same time, industry were encouraged to do online submission. As a result of that, the industry leaders are now able to track submissions, and we know exactly at what point in the registration process, so it improved transparency. We've introduced tablets for our inspectors, field inspectors, but there was a big resistance and pushback on using it, because then it would have been more transparent, and they didn't like that, unfortunately. We've established also advisories out in the public using social media. So there's better reputation now, because the public's able to know which products have been seized and what are considered counterfeit, where not to buy them. Basically, those are the improved advisories. But we also created what is known as a national single window with the Bureau of Customs, where imported products come into the ports. Because of this single window, there is an ease of doing business in terms of getting these goods across. I think we're doing electronic submission of ADR reports to Uppsala Monitoring Center, and I know for a fact that UMC, which is the International Drug Monitoring Center, is using data science to data mine those reports from, I think to date, they have something over 5 million reports of ADRs. So I think those are some of the examples I thought might be useful to share. Thank you.
To add to what has those fine points that have been made, my sense is there are also beyond the updating the administrative processes with, for example, electronic databases and so on in terms of the collection of information, the monitoring and so on. One big area is actually the big data area, because that's where regulators actually may be able to uncover things that in the past had not been easily available. I also do want to emphasize the role of social media in this, and partly is actually can be captured by big data. But at the same time, in the Chinese case in particular, several of the major cases would not have been corrected but for the ability to put information online because of the censorship in the official media. It's very hard to get information out, but now when things are electronically available, actually through social media, suddenly you have actually a single actor can become very powerful as a whistleblower and so on, and that should be very valuable. I do think actually there needs to be still more thought being put to the issue of counterfeiting. How could information technology be used to help with counterfeiting, actually? Because the issue is also a cat and mouse game.
Well, we have 3 more questions, and I would rather accumulate them and then answer them in group. So first, Listra, then Raymond, and then Johnny. Go, please.
Okay, thank you so much. One of the things that the committee has been tasked to do is to examine the priority given to food and drug regulatory systems in low and middle income countries. And as I listened to you, Dr. Yang, you mentioned that in China, the Chinese Food and Drug Administration was sort of modeled after the US FDA. And we see from 2012 to now, a lot happened in China. And then in the last year, year and a half, we saw what might seem as the dismantling of CFDA into something else. I'm just curious. I wanted to get your reaction in terms of what was the impetus for the change and what you think might be sort of the outcome of that change in terms of the priority given to food and drug, the regulatory, that central regulatory system in China.
Raymond?
Thank you. In fact, my question is that if I heard you well, Dali, you said that risk assessment has been separated from for the risk management, and there are two different institutions. I wanted to know how what mechanism is available to make sure that the two institutions are working closely so that they enhance effectiveness of making sure that the food analysis is done properly. Also, I wanted to add one point in relation to how technology have enhanced improved the effectiveness of regulation in food and drugs. For example, introduction of field test kits and the mobile laboratories have helped, for example, food inspectors to make decisions quickly, and they can decide whether some of the products should be sent to the laboratory or not. That one is really eased the burden of sending all the samples to the laboratory for analysis. And the new methods for different parameters are being introduced to help at least enhance effectiveness. Thank you.
John?
Yeah, I'd like to, thank you. I'd like to tie together Mike Ward's pie chart this morning that told us that 99 countries, 51% are level 1 and 2. But there was this phrase that really struck me. But some can be considered functional if. And I want to tie that in with Lembit's comments about the big fish, small fish, medium fish. And the increased openness to, which we've seen in other areas of global health, that there is more genuine transparency and collaboration and recognition that we're better if we coordinate. Can you talk a little about the possibility of structuring this way of having small regulatory authorities sort of being seen as functional, even if they don't have it all in-house, and how they tie in? Can you imagine a way of structuring that in a way where actually, they could be, it's like getting a driver's license with a restriction to wear glasses kind of thing. You can drive, but there are considerations.
First, Dr. Yang?
Yeah, there are especially a couple questions, especially pertaining to the reforms in China. The trend, in the case of the Chinese system, because it started with a socialist planned economy kind of system in the beginning in terms of the Soviet style, and that was gradually transformed. So in the process of transformation, used to be there were a lot of industrial ministries. Most of those have disappeared. And then the Chinese leadership gradually began to set up regulatory systems for many different domains. But increasingly, there was the recognition that those regulatory domains sometimes were actually fragmented and so on. So the effort by the Chinese government over the last 15 years or so has especially been in terms of trying to integrate the different functions under one umbrella in what is known as the big ministry system. So the state administration of market regulation is pretty much a merger of several different administrations, regulatory administrations, including industry and commerce, quality inspection, and also the Food and Drug Administration, and so on. They put them together. But at the same time, they also recognized drug safety regulation so specialized, so it still got its dedicated entity, but now subsidiary to this market regulator. So this is pretty much the process. But of course, short of a full very often many of the regulatory issues require especially a whole of government approach. So in some sense, you still need coordination. And this comes back to the second issue. But in this particular case, in terms of the division of labor on food safety, the risk assessment is lodged with the National Health Commission. But food safety regulation and implementation is actually with the State Administration of Market Regulation. So it's actually and this was explicitly recognized that there is this division of labor. And also the national leadership also called out to the other ministries, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs and so on, because, for example, animal husbandry is under that ministry and so on. So the central government does recognize you need coordination and division of labor so that actually each knows their proper responsibilities, but they also need to work together. Now, in this particular case, the Chinese solution is by having another rank on top of them, a vice premier or a state councillor at the rank of vice premier, essentially, so that that person can help coordinate across the different ministries. In this case, there is officially a state council. This is the national government, a state council leadership, a food safety, really a council, but it's lodged in the market regulator actually. But that helps directly to get the food safety issue to this vice premier, who in turn can bring the different agencies together, essentially. It's not the best solution, but it's one that the Chinese leadership has worked. I think in the Chinese case, because the governments tend to be incredibly elaborate, because nothing that's an issue doesn't get covered in the Chinese case. Usually if it's not, then they create something. So therefore, there's a lot of some capacity. The other issue, however, is also the central versus local. The central government is small in numbers, which is very strange. This was a legacy from the 1990s reforms. Actually, they didn't want a large government at the central government level, but then you have the provinces, the municipalities, and so on. So it's lopsided. But the local administrations usually have a local interest. And how do you coordinate between the local interest and the central interest? Again, you require the central leadership to come in. So it's really a lot is to be said about Chinese politics in this regard. And that justifies the central government intervention usually.
Well, there are two issues I want to comment. One is I have a bit an allergy for this topic. It's the quality control testing. I have seen it in practice in many parts of the world, and I must say it's really bad. One is the principle of having magic tools, of having some sort of a rapid test. They have a role, but in long-term run, the role is not really substantial. The problem is that you can't test the quality into the product. You have to build the quality into the product. You can test, but that doesn't build the quality into the product. Now, the problem is that you have to then deal with the products coming to the market rather than putting more and more efforts of testing. So I had a country visit in one country in Asia. It was in 2000s. They did impressive number of quality control testing. The trouble was that almost none failed. The rate was better than in US and in Europe, in average. And then I asked, why do you do it, Because you're so good, you should just economize, save money, and don't do it, because you're so good. The problem was partly, I couldn't find out all the reasons why those so good results were, but one of the reasons was that they were exclusively sampling from good guys, because it was safe. You go to the good guys, it's safe, You go to the bad guys, you are in danger, You don't go to the bad guys. And then you report fantastic results, yeah? So this is something that we have to say. I was recent in another part of the world, again, the same, quality control testing, all the time quality control testing. Now, the countries, if the manufacturers know that you do the quality control testing of certain samples, why do you think that they give you bad samples? They know that you go to testing. What happens in real world is that these guys who are the bad guys, they take a good sample and give to the regulator like their sample, and that's it, you know. So the quality control testing has certain value, but it couldn't be as a replacement for the normal assessment of quality part of the dossier that has to be to prove that the qualities has been built into the product. This means that in advanced regulatory settings, the quality control testing is nowadays extremely rare. In the European regulatory system that I know the best, the new drugs go to the market and there is no quality control testing before they go to the market, because the regulator has been inspecting the site, they have assessed the documents, they are completely convinced that the quality has been produced into the product. And funny enough, they have even the specific guidance document in Europe, which is setting the principles how to do the risk-based sampling of centralized procedure-approved products to choose the candidate for quality control. And the likeliness that your product will be there tested during the 3 years may be as little as 1% or lower. So this is where the regulatory systems have developed over the years to have the emphasis so strongly on ensuring that the quality is built into the product, that the need for the quality control has been minimized, and it's strictly risk-based. It's not just going, everywhere. And it's another thing is that Anna-Lia mentioned another mantra, which is the batch release. In modern days, I think you could also have some sort of a reluctance to say that in every case the traditional batch release is necessary for vaccines. Because we need to look on there also, we talked about innovation. In regulatory affairs, there are some things that are settled, and then nobody wants to touch it. Once it's settled, it's there, It's easy, it's safe. You don't touch it because it's safe not to touch it. But the things have developed, and sometimes we might relax some of the regulations after years when we have obtained the knowledge and experience and the scientific advances that enables us to relax. Do we do that? Not so much. Second is the Jonas question, can the regulator be a small fish but still fully functional? I think we have discussed it with Mike many times, and yes, it can be. Because you can, if you have the system where you have built in the reliance to other regulators who have the capacity to do the job. Let's say a very good example is there are some very small countries in Africa which may have 1 or 2 manufacturers, local ones. And then what's the value of the GMP inspection in this country where you have the inspector for 2 manufacturers or 1? They can't have, it's like a surgeon. If you don't do enough, you are disqualified. The inspector is the same. Now, in this case, what is that to contract out to the neighboring country who has good inspectorate to do the inspection in your manufacturing 1 or 2 units for yourself? You may contract it out. If it's settled in your system and it's done in a credible way, you can be functional because you fulfill the function. It doesn't mean that you can't contract certain functions out if it's done properly. And it's also like any contracting out, if you contract it out, you still have the responsibility. So you have to done, the contracting out has to be done in a proper way. And I think Mike can add to that because it's really for the small fish a very, very burning question. And another thing, what I said long time ago when we discussed it, if you are a medium-sized authority, let's say, you may be world-class authority, really top class, in certain very narrow areas of products. Because in your jurisdiction or your universities may have developed something which is unique. And you have developed the regulatory science to support that. Why not? It's possible. Because you have to be also looking what makes sense locally. Yes, Mike, maybe you can.
Thank you, Lambert, and thank you, Jonathan, for that question. I can only concur. We are very much embracing the principle of being competent, or whatever we want to call it, and not doing everything yourself. And again, even the largest regulatory authorities can't do it all themselves. In fact, that is probably one of the fundamental issues here that is being considered by this committee, and everybody should recognize that fact. So this means really saying, okay, how do I, with limited resources, focus those resources, and we talked about public health value, and do those things properly. And wherever you can take over the product life cycle opportunities, you should do so, but you should do it with a certain thought to this and process. And this is, again, where we're promoting reliance through WLAs and NRAs of regional reference. Coming back to what Analia has identified as a good model for medical devices is the Medical Device Single Audit Program, where you've got so many manufacturers of medical devices and components globally, even the FDA can't do it. They can't inspect at frequencies that they have to inspect at. And so what you're doing there is saying, let's talk about smart regulation and smart approaches where we provide the regulatory oversight of the auditing organizations that have many more resources to do this, but according to our process, according to our recognition of these auditing organizations under a robust process and monitoring that. You know, so this is where you have to leverage resources that are available to undertake and to fulfill the mandate that is the same for every regulatory authority in the world. It's not different, it's the ways and means. And how do we address that in a more intelligent fashion? So yes, absolutely, small regulators can be competent, but they have to really think about how they're going to do this appropriately.
Well, okay.
All right, thank you very much. I just wanted to react very quickly to Lembit's comments, and I think he was really right on the spot in terms of overt emphasis on quality testing. And I think it's just to differentiate that concern globally needs to be recognized and addressed, particularly when we're talking about pre-approval testing, where at times quality tests have become part of the delay in timely access to medicines. And I think that often, as we know, that the manufacturer, as Lembit mentioned, will really give you products that have been manufactured according to GMP standards and that are most likely going to pass those quality tests. I think we need to begin to rationalize the justification and need for those tests. However, it's a different ballgame altogether with post-marketing surveillance, and I'm happy that Lembit pointed out to that even with the need for post-marketing surveillance, it's not going to be a carte blanche. It's not going to be do everything. There has to be a risk-based approach, and we've thought about this a lot. And what are those criteria? What are those considerations? Considerations that include even the geographic location of the country, the epidemiology of the country, several factors that has to be put into metrics to be able to identify those products that you need to have a careful watch over for the life cycle of the product. I think there are just a lot of issues embedded in that. And maybe when we discuss this much more deeply, I guess tomorrow, there'll be a need to begin to think about prioritization. The small agency that we're talking about, one of the questions I had much earlier, is really how do you have an evidence-based and robust prioritization? Yes, we might say, well, you do assessment, you do benchmarking, you have the IDP, you may tell a country, look at the policy issues, look at the human resources issues, but can we learn from what is done in the rest part of health? In other words, priority setting with a return on investment as the guide. why should I invest in pre-approval or post-approval if I have just limited resources to invest in one of them? And what is the return on investment in any of them based on the size of your country, the epidemiology, the geography, and a host of other variables? So I think it's very important that we are really looking at evidence to use that to drive and persuade countries to invest in the right things.
Well, I think that we covered a wide range of issues. Thank you very much to the members of this panel. You have really helped us a lot in order to initiate our work with the right foot. Thanks a lot, and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. We will be reconvening here tomorrow, right? Same room, same place. There will be breakfast at 8:30, and we'll start promptly again at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And for those who are on the committee, is it okay to leave materials here, or should we take them with us?
It'll be okay left here.
Okay, so if you want to leave your folder here, that would be fine. Jillian, is there some instruction for the committee members about our dinner this evening?
Yes. So I just saw this, and Sarah Ann, this is such a nice touch. I've never seen this before. She wrote it on the back of your badge, the address and the time of dinner. So you can meet at 633D at 6 p.m. And she has everything here, including emergency contacts. And thanks, man. It's great.
Great, so dinner will be at 6 o'clock for the committee members at a restaurant called Rasica.
Yeah.
I think you'll enjoy it very much, yes.
That's my favorite.
Good,
Very
so
good.
we are adjourned for the afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good to see you.